has shown that an unwavering commitment to the poor, to the elderly, to those without hope, regardless of fashion or convention, is the greatest reward of public service.
Which brings us to our next introductory point. If there was foul play in the death of John Kennedy Jr., and we will show absolutely conclusively in a few minutes that there was, George W. Bush and his father have to be seen as the prime suspects. It's an obvious point, really. As we saw in JFK2, The Bush Connection, George Herbert Walker Bush helped to supervise the assassination of President Kennedy, and from that moment on, his political future was made. He was a made man. He lost the race for Senate. They gave him a seat in Congress. He lost again for the Senate. They gave him a job in the White House. He lost the primaries to Reagan. They made him vice president, and he ruled while Reagan napped for 8 years. Does little Georgie's political career show such intervention, such involvement by the dark lords of Nazi politics? You be the judge. A few weeks after John Kennedy Jr.'s death, little Georgie lost to John McCain in the New Hampshire primaries. Now, when you lose in New Hampshire, you're supposed to see the rats scurrying from your sinking ship and jumping on board with the winner. After New Hampshire, the money flows from the losers to the winner. That's how it's supposed to go, as water runs downhill and as day follows night. But in 1999, that's not how it went. Water ran uphill. Night was followed by a much deeper darkness, and money flowed like a plague into the coffers of George W. Bush after his loss in New Hampshire. Now, how can you explain this? Why didn't that loss increase financial support for John McCain by the big money establishment? He was clearly more electable. Why did that loss result in a sudden and enormous increase in financial backing for George W.? These millions of dollars allowed Bush to smear and slime McCain's image with incredible vigor, to buy up the endorsements of the religious groups, of the veterans groups, and to call virtually every voter in the state and tell them the lie that McCain had an illegitimate black child. Why did the big money establishment overwhelmingly support Bush at this time instead of siding with McCain? Was it because McCain was a war hero and Bush was a draft dodger? Was it because Bush had been an openly drug-abusing alcoholic and McCain had led a conservative lifestyle? How do you explain it? It's not so difficult. They needed a stooge, someone they could trust to shut up and do what he was told, as they planned and executed the murder of 3,000 Americans, to anger the American people into a series of unending wars, killing tens of thousands more, so that they could steal hundreds of billions of dollars from the national treasury. Now, if his father got his seat at this table by killing President Kennedy, who did little Georgie have to kill to get his seat at this table? It's a fair question. And now it's time to ask the key question you always ask your prime suspect. Where was Georgie the night John Kennedy Jr. was murdered? Go to a news retrieval service and search every newspaper in the world. You'll find that Friday, July 16, 1999, the day John Kennedy Jr. died, Bush was in Iowa in the morning, running for president, flipping pancakes and kissing babies. The polls showed that he was losing in New Hampshire to John McCain. You might see this as a crucial weekend for campaigning, but Bush got on a bus at 10 o'clock that Friday morning and disappeared for 3 days. On Saturday, the media ran to Al Gore to ask his response to John Jr.'s death so he could say how sad and sorry he was. And Gore said that he would cancel all his campaign rallies for the weekend out of respect for the family's losses. And then the reporters ran to the Bush campaign headquarters. I mean, here's Bush, a president's son. What does he think of the death of another president's son? That was their angle. And is he going to cancel his campaign appearances like Gore? But do you know what Bush said? Nothing. He was nowhere to be found. His staff couldn't say where he was, what he was doing, or even when he would be back. Although they were sure, they said, that if they could find him, he would of course express his deep sorrow and sympathy for the family's loss. The last preliminary point to be made, based on the events of John's life, is that he was not a W. He was not an inconsequential, drug-using, heavy-drinking, irresponsible boob. He was a responsible, smart, dynamic, responsible, good-hearted, devastatingly handsome, responsible talent with a winning personality and a commitment to make the world a better place. Did I mention how responsible he was? Specifically and most importantly for us today, he was an enormously responsible pilot. Without a dissenting opinion, the 9 flight instructors who watched John fly over the course of 17 years agreed that he was methodical about his flight planning and very cautious regarding his aviation decision-making. How did such a careful pilot end up crashing into the sea, killing his wife and his sister-in-law and possibly his unborn child? How? Well, that's what we're here to find out. The National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, investigates all airplane crashes. They found no evidence in this case of any mechanical problems. The weather was clear and the moon was visible. The radar report shows that John's plane just suddenly dropped, as if someone had grabbed the controls, the steering yoke, and pushed it forward as hard as they could. It looks like a suicide. And it's standard in any accident investigation to examine the state of mind of the individuals involved, to assess the possibility that the crash was not an accident at all, but a suicide. So let's do that quickly. John and his wife Carolyn were famous for a fight they had in public, and friends said that for 3 years they had disagreed about whether and when to have children. But in May, 2 months before the crash, John was very upbeat about his marriage and told Toronto businessman Keith Stein that he was looking forward to fatherhood. Stein said, quote, he talked about having kids as if it were imminent in their future. On John's fatal last Friday, he told his staff not to worry about their jobs because, quote, as long as I'm alive, this magazine will continue to publish, unquote. This would be a really cruel thing for a guy to say who was planning to kill himself in a few hours. On his last Friday afternoon, John and his wife's sister, Lauren, arrived at the Essex County Airport in Caldwell, New Jersey at 7:30. Witnesses say Carolyn arrived 15 minutes later at 7:45, and yet, while conditions worsened as the skies became more and more hazy as the sun went down, they sat around for 45 minutes. Why? What were they waiting for? This is an anomaly. It doesn't make any sense. In any case, at 8:30, 45 minutes after arriving, John, his sister-in-law, Lauren, and his wife took off from Caldwell, New Jersey, and headed northeast towards Martha's Vineyard, ascending to a cruising altitude of 5,500 feet. An NTSB radar analysis shows the final moments of the flight in great detail. At 9:33, the plane, still headed northeast, began descending from its cruising altitude of 5,500 feet. At 9:38, the plane, while still descending, began a slight turn to the right so that it was headed due east, lining itself up with the southern coast of Martha's Vineyard. This was John's favorite approach to the Martha's Vineyard Airport since it allowed him to fly over his mother's home on the southern shore where he spent many childhood summers. At 9:38 and 20 seconds, the plane completed the turn and stopped its descent. The plane was now at 2,200 feet. But it's against FAA regulations for a plane to fly below 2,500 feet without first contacting the tower. So in a manner which is absolutely typical of John's carefulness in following procedures, he brought the plane back up to 2,500 feet. At 9:38 and 50 seconds, with wings level, the plane was on final approach with 14 miles to go to the airport. At 200 miles per hour, the plane would land in about 5 minutes. At 9:39, John contacted the tower. We don't know how long this conversation lasted, but at 9:40 and 15 seconds, 1 minute and 15 seconds later, the plane suddenly dove out of the sky, falling 2,500 feet in 45 seconds, crashing into the water at 200 miles per hour.